I'm glad you could be with us here, though I'll just have to take it by faith that you are, for the second session of our historical, or perhaps non-historical, Moses course. And what I want to do, having laid a lot of groundwork last time, is to start looking at the various Moses stories. I want to save maybe the best for last, the real action stuff with the plagues and all that later. I want to get a bit of that will obtrude here, but I want to get into some ceremonial and or legal precedent stories today. And just to remind you of where I'm going with this, the idea is that these stories, virtually all these stories about Moses, are in a sense not really about Moses. He simply figures in an instrumental way to get some business done in ancient Israelite thought and practice. So I have just purposely abstracted these in the sense that I'm dealing with them category by category rather than, which one might do, just going through the whole Moses narrative. I think this really makes the point, though, of that these stories came from a certain place trying to deal with certain issues. They are not a continuous history or biography of Mo. And so the first one I want to look at is the introduction of the divine name Yahweh. You have two versions of this. We'll find there are two versions of several of these stories. First one I want to look at is the priestly version, which is a more famous one, in Exodus 3:1 through 15. Again, we touched on this last time. There's some inevitable overlap. We'll read in the Revised Standard Version here. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God, or one might say the mountain of Elohim. And the angel of Yahweh appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush, and he looked, and lo, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed, and it was burned up. And Moses said, I will turn aside almost forgot. I will turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. When Yahweh saw that he turned aside to see, Elohim called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. Then he said, Do not come near. Put off your shoes from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the El God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at Elohim. Then Yahweh said, I have seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring forth my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? He said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought forth the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God upon this mountain. By the way, what does that mean exactly? How's that an authenticating sign that they're going to sacrifice to God at the mountain? I'm guessing this is just a shorthand reference by the redactor editor to what is to happen once they get to Sinai and have all the thunder and lightning and stuff, so it will appear to be miraculous. Anyway, 13. Then Moses said to Elohim, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? Elohim said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Elohim also said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the Elohim of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, Yahweh, the Elohim of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt, of the land of the Canaanites," etc. It goes on a bit more, but we're interested in the naming thing. Notice the one known as Elohim to the fathers is henceforth to be known by the name Yahweh. There's already some conflation of earlier sources. The repetitiveness implies that the alternations between Yahweh and Elohim might imply that, though it's not absolutely clear, because this is the priestly source where God is called names until we get to this very scene, so it isn't odd or contradictory at that point for him to speak of this hitherto being known as Elohim, but now as Yahweh. There's some etymological fiddling here, some playing around to try to explain, or more likely re-explain, the name Yahweh or Jehovah as based on the Hebrew word for to be, Hayah. Now that may not be the original point, because as Yahweh is a storm god, some people have pointed out the appropriateness of the possibility that it looks kind of like it may have been derived from an Arabic word for the blowing of the wind. That would make a lot of sense. At any rate, there is the priestly version. Then we have 3 chapters later, the E version. Remember, there's no J version of this because there's no flip over in J. The whole point of the J source is here is someone who calls God Yahweh from the very beginning, from Eden on, and so there's no changeover. He just assumes that they must have always called him that. But P and E switch over as of the time of Moses, and the E version is found in Exodus 6, 2 through 8, another one of these things that explains the otherwise unforgivable redundancy. So here we are. And Elohim said to Moses, I am Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai. But by my name Yahweh I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them. This must be the priestly version. Yeah, the earlier one was the Elohistic version, yes. This has the earmarks of the priestly writer, the use of El Shaddai as opposed to merely Elohim, and I will establish my covenant language, which he repeats all the time. Verse 4, I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they dwelt as sojourners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the people of Israel, whom the Egyptians hold in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am Yahweh, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. And I will take you for my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am Yahweh your God, who has brought you up from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land which I swore to give Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. I am Yahweh. There you've got the priestly version. Again, no J version. Now you might ask, why was there this changeover with both of these sources? What is the importance of that? Well, it seems like what's happened here is that this marks an important turn of theology, where they sought to fuse together more than one deity who had hitherto been worshipped. Either someone had introduced a Kenite and Arabic deity, Yahweh, the storm god, and sought to, so he comes from outside the Israelite tradition, and they decide, well, look, from now on, this deity is the same as Elohim or El Shaddai. Or it may be, and there's evidence for this elsewhere in the Old Testament, that what's happened is that someone is trying to fuse father and son. It's clear from Deuteronomy 32 that originally they'd believed that El Elyon, God Most High, obviously the ultimate deity, the head of the pantheon, had 70 sons, the sons of Elohim, the sons of El, the sons of God, and he divided up the human race so that each one of them would have a nation to rule. They took their picks, and Yahweh, one of the sons, decided, I'd kind of like Jacob or Israel. Okay, you got him. And the other ones had the other gods, Rimmon and Dagon and so on. Well, they all had their nations. And later on in the book of Daniel, you hear all about this, that the prince of the people of Persia fought with the angel of Israel and all that. Originally, there were the different sons of God in charge. And you have an explicit fusion of El Elyon and Yahweh in Genesis chapter 14, the fascinating story where Abraham comes back from the great struggle. He's depicted as a great warlord, or a king even. This kind of unspoken between the lines there that he may have been considered a king at some point. And he meets the enigmatic Melchizedek. I love the story in Genesis 14:17. After his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, I almost expect a footnote saying, yeah, he's the guy that invented cheddar cheese, but I guess not. The king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shava, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of El Elyon. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by El Elyon, maker of heaven and earth. And blessed be El Elyon, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the persons, the prisoners of war, the slaves, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have sworn to Yahweh El Elyon, maker of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal thong or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abraham rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten and the share of the men who went with me. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share. So he says, I'm not taking a stinking shoestring from you, pal. I don't want people saying, oh, that wealthy Abraham, it was the king of Sodom that made him rich. No thanks. And I got enough trouble, and I don't want to be associated with Reverend Wright here, right? The last thing I need is to be considered a buddy of the king of Sodom, for Pete's sake. Anyhow, so yeah, these two stories where Yahweh reveals his name and says, okay, that's it from now on, that's how I want to be known. They surely must commemorate some sort of a major turning point. I think an attempt to streamline the pantheon or to unify two gods from within and without Israel, and so kind of ecumenism. I don't mean to say this is a fiction. I mean, it is in one sense. They have people saying what they never said, if they even existed at all. But the idea of fusing two gods together is no devious expedient. I mean, if you think there is a god or a high god or a king of gods, and the guy in the next county says, well, he thinks there's one too, but he's got a different name. it doesn't take much to conclude that, well, I guess we've been worshiping the same deity under a different name. Well, let's use both, or let's pick one. Often you have Christians ignorant of Islam who are shocked to discover that in the Quran all these Old Testament tales are retold, and that Allah is simply the same thing as Eloah in Hebrew, the God. So what do they decide? Let's pretend your God, Allah, and ours is the same. No, they are the same. So, maybe they came up with that in the Epistle of Aristeas. A Hellenistic Jewish author says, look, you call him Zeus, we call him Jehovah, what's the difference? Some of the Greeks at the time said, this Jehovah of the Jews, obviously is the same as Dionysus. There's a whole religion based on that premise, the Sabazius religion. So who knows, a fiction or just ecumenical theology saying let's not haggle over names. What you really need to check is God concepts. That's much more important. What sort of a divine being you think it is. Anyhow, this is a ceremonial of theological precedent. If somebody wants to continue to differentiate these deities, these stories are there to say, no, I'm afraid not. You see, we point to this as a pedigree to say that the Kenite Yahweh is the God of Israel. And that would have been important because the Kenites were big allies of King David and so forth, and Cain is supposed to be their father. They have an important role in Israelite history. All right, the next one. We got through that relatively quickly and believably, I guess, huh? And the next one would be a sort of political one, kind of an apostolic succession story, and it has interesting reverberations in the New Testament as well. And this is the designation of the 70 elders of Israel, the men of the great assembly, or the great synagogue, as they're called in Jewish history. We've got a couple of versions of this. Let's look at Exodus 18. 1 through 27, and I believe you will spot some New Testament parallels that are by no means accidental. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that Elohim had done for Moses and for Israel his people, how Yahweh had brought Israel out of Egypt. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, or as they call her in the movie, Zephyrah, I don't know, not knowing Hebrew, I can't tell you which is better. Moses' wife, after he had sent her away, footnote, out of the line of fire, right, for safety's sake, earlier. And her 2 sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner, a ger, in a foreign land, and the name of the other Eleazar, for he said, the Elohim of my father was my help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Eleazar means God is my help. Eli is my God, and Azar is help. That's what Eve is in the Garden of Eden. God makes her an Azar for the man, a help, which certainly does not imply subordinate if God is the Azar of Moses. Anyway, you know me, I can't stay on topic. Verse 5, and Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of Elohim. And when one told Moses, lo, your father-in-law Jethro is coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her, Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and did obeisance and kissed him, he bowed and kissed him on the cheeks, no doubt, if you're worried. And they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that Yahweh had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them in the way, and how Yahweh had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good which Yahweh had done to Israel, and that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, Blessed be Yahweh, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods, because he delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians when they dealt arrogantly with them. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, offered a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. Well, that's mighty interesting right there. First of all, he doesn't say, I now know that the God I serve, Yahweh, is the only God. You know, even the Exodus doesn't convince him of that. I mean, that wasn't even the right answer yet. This assumes monolatry, if that. One's God is the greatest of gods, or one might say the chief of one's pantheon. One's ultimate God is greater than all other gods, but there's nothing here about one single God alone. You're going to have to wait till Jeremiah and the second Isaiah for that. And notice Moses' father-in-law ranks this guy as above Aaron. He's more like Melchizedek as a super priest. Okay, 13. On the morrow Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood about Moses from morning till evening. They're waiting their turn. Right? And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, What is this you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand about you from morning till evening? And Moses said to his father-in-law, Because the people come to me to inquire of Elohim. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between a man and his neighbor, and I make them know the statutes of Elohim and his decisions. The Lord God has said nothing concerning parade floats. I'm sorry, I got that out of Saturday Night Live. All right. What does he do? Well, this is like people's court. This is what kings did all the time. Think of King Solomon and the two prostitutes, each of whom claims the baby is hers. How's he going to decide? Well, yeah, that's what kings did. And that's all the reason for all that stuff about how the king says he will vindicate the poor and he'll look into the matter and not be satisfied with the superficial. Because he's a judge, literally, on the throne. That's why Gideon and all these guys, the leaders of Israel, said to be judges. So they needed somebody to arbitrate. And that's what he does. And as his decisions become case law, right? He hears their cases, and the result becomes a precedent, and he makes statutes. You notice what is going on here? We have an alternate, no doubt more close to the truth, a version of how Moses gave the law. Now, I've already let the cat out of the bag. I don't even think there was a Moses, but the point is they're depicting him doing what the priests and judges did who did give the Torah incrementally. Isaiah speaks of the priests who give Torah, a word that means both instruction and law. Well, this is how they did it. They didn't go up a mountaintop and have lightning bolts blast letters into stone tablets and so forth. That's a kind of a metaphor for the idea that Moses or whoever is an inspired lawgiver. In fact, we're going to hear that he used to do this sitting beside a brook, which implies, as ancient oracles did, he would go into a trance state and hear the babbling of the brook and interpret it as the word of God. Deborah used to sit beneath a palm tree, and in a trance state she would hear the palm fronds rustling, and this would speak to her as the word of God, like the Delphic oracle, same thing exactly. So this doesn't mean Moses, well, it does mean, in terms of the narrative, that Moses is doing this, but it's simply using him as an example of how anybody in such a position did. And we'll see that Jethro is about to suggest organizing a system of higher and lower courts. I mean that as an analogy, that's exactly what happens here, and therefore this is a charter for a legal system used at least by some groups in ancient Israel, or at least someone is urging that it be done, right? My guess is, since the story was preserved, it was done. In case somebody said, "Oh, why do we have to do it this way?" Hey, look, here's the story. Okay. 17, Moses' father-in-law said, "Well, what you're doing is not good. You and the people with you will wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you alone. You are not, here we go. You were not able to perform it alone. Listen now to my voice. I will give you counsel, and Elohim be with you. You shall represent the people before Elohim, and bring their cases to Elohim, and you shall teach them the statutes and the decisions, and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, beyond that, choose able men from all the people, such as fear Elohim, men who are trustworthy and who hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as rulers of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens, and let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, and Elohim so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all this people also will go to their place in peace." So he says, this seems right to me. If God confirms it with you, I think you'll like the result. So what has he suggested? Lower courts. I think implicitly based on the precedents that Moses has set out and will continue to set out as the Supreme Court. But this way, he won't have to handle every lousy case that comes up. But they'll all do it with the authority of Moses, since he's delegating it. So, 24, Moses gave heed to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens, and they judged the people at all times. Hard cases they brought to Moses, but any small matter they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way into his own country. Now, it's pretty interesting. A legal or political precedent. Now, you can't replace Moses when he dies, but you can always have successors to these guys, so this is apostolic succession. This is what Weber called the routinization of charisma. Moses is literally the charismatic, the anointed, prophetic leader and lawgiver. Well, he's gone, but luckily, the law he established can be applied by others whom he appointed. So this is exactly and precisely the Catholic notion of the apostolic succession. Let me use that as the chief excuse to leap over into the New Testament. I've never heard anyone else say this. Aren't I original? Aren't you impressed with that? But I'm sure it's true that you find a story in Mark's Gospel that is based on this to the point of being a rewrite of it, and this is all found in one nice and neat chapter in, Mark 3. Is that right? Yes, 3. Let's notice basically what happens here. In Mark 3, you've got a visit from the relatives of Jesus, just like Moses had a visit from his relatives. There is the fear stated that Jesus, like Moses, stays so busy that he's going to be driven nuts if he keeps this up. And so there is the choice of a bunch of subordinates to share the burden of the great man's work. Now, these elements are not in the same order. My guess is they were. And that at first a story was told in which we have it established that Jesus is busy day in and day out, teaching and healing. He can't even get time to eat. Then his family hears about it, and they say, "Oh, this is no good. He's going to be beside himself if he doesn't get some help." And so they go. He welcomes them, and they say, "What you're doing is not good. You need others to help you shoulder this burden, and then all will go well with you. Why don't you pick let's say 12 guys to share the burden. And Jesus, according to this hypothetical original, would have said, well, that's wise. I believe I will. And so he goes and chooses 12 to share his labor. So, and this would have been important because the 12 disciples are one authority faction, and their successors were like that. The desposunoi, or the heirs of the Lord, James the Just and the other relatives, the caliphate, they would have starred in this. They would have been worthy of equal honor to the 12, since having the 12 was their idea, according to this story. But things have changed. There is competition between the two groups. Eventually, the heirs and the 12. I mean, you can see that even in Acts in its heavily doctored form. You got Peter as the head of the group, and then suddenly it's James. You know what happened? Well, where'd this guy come from, even? Well, these are the rumblings underneath, and so there's some sort of a breach. And Mark doesn't like either one of them. Mark, I think, is a Marcionite gospel, and he doesn't like any of these leaders. He likes Paul, whom he mentions without naming him as the lone exorcist, whom John says, we told him to cease and desist. He's infringing on our copyright on the name Jesus. Only to have Jesus slap him down and say, what the hell are you doing? It's not as if we've got friends coming out our ears. We need any friends we can get. You told this guy not to do it? What do you think he's likely to, he's cast out demons in my name? You think he's going to be an enemy? He may be now. Thanks, John. Well, that's got to be Paul. He doesn't go with the 12, but he uses the name Jesus anyway. That explains why we now read the same story in Mark in fragments that are all changed around. How about this? Here we go. In 3. Well, let's approximate more or less the numbers, the Moses order, and start with right in the middle of 3:19b. You remember, of course, the Bible writers did not divide their work into chapters and verses. That came many hundreds of years later. It was a clever scribal innovation just to make it easier for you and me to find stuff. Then he went home, and the crowd came together again so that they could not even eat. And when his people, his own, heard it, they went out to seize him, for they said, he's beside himself. And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, he is possessed by Beelzebul, and by the prince of demons he casts out the demons. And then Jesus has this mini debate with them, so trying to reduce their premise to absurdity about the demonic exorcisms. And he says, you guys are dangerously close to blaspheming the Holy Spirit. Saying stuff like this. And why'd Mark put that in there? Because the house divided business, and he's saying, well, the household of Jesus is divided because his family really, they're incompetents and self-seekers and all that. Anyway, here they come again, 31. And his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside they sent to him and called him, and a crowd was sitting about him, just like Moses, right? And they said to him, your mother and your brothers are outside asking for you. And he replied, who are my mother and my brothers? Looking around on those who sat about him, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother. Yikes. So I'm saying that originally the story would have paralleled the Moses story, though here it contrasts it. Moses receives the embassy of his father-in-law, his wife, and his sons happily. Here, get out of here, hit the bricks, these are my real family. And it's as if he knows already that they think he's crazy, right? They're not worried he's gonna go crazy. They think he's already gone off the deep end, and Jesus returns the favor. Well, then, Are we ever going to get to him picking the disciples? Oh, he already has, according to this version of the story. It's no coincidence that just before we had the note in verse 20 that he was surrounded by the crowd, as in Exodus 18. Immediately preceding that here, we have the choice of the disciples. So go back up to Mark 3:13. And he went up into the hills and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. Where does this come from? I mean, this is without any antecedent in Mark up to now. Why is he even doing this? Well, we know originally his family suggested it. So here it's out of place. And he appointed 12 to be with him and to be sent out to preach and to have authority to cast out demons. In other words, the stuff he does, they're going to help out. Simon, whom he surnamed Peter, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, whom he named Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder. Actually, it means sons of the thunderer, whether Yahweh or his cognate alter ego Zeus. That means the upholders of the vault of heaven, the title of Castor and Pollux, twin sons of Zeus. That's who James and John are. Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas and James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus and Simon the Canaanian. That is the nationalist, not the Canaanite. And Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. And then we start with him being crowded. He shouldn't have been anymore if he had these assistants. But this wasn't the original order. All right. Enough of that. I think you can see, though, originally this is trying to explain the origin of the apostles in the same way that we had the origin of the men of the Great Assembly, the 70 elders. So New Testament rewrite. That means there is not a germ of history in the New Testament version. It is simply a rewrite of a story that is already a fiction. It reads in today's appellate court system into the past and puts Moses' name on it to authorize it. It's just not history. But we're not done with the establishment of these guys. These 70 elders, we've got another version of it in Numbers 11 through 12. That one was Exodus 18. This is Numbers, book of Numbers. Other than a couple of stories like this, surely one of the most petrifyingly boring parts of the Bible. And where it just says, it just catalogs boring figures ad nauseum. Okay. Numbers 11:11. Moses said to Yahweh, "Why have you dealt ill with your servant? Why have I not found favor in your sight that you lay the burden of all this people upon me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I bring them forth that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries I'm forgetting, I'm doing Moses. Carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries the suckling child to the land which thou didst swear to give their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give to all this people?" I love when he uses the word people. Right? Skip down to 14. "I am not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me." I won't get at any Soylent Green jokes, even though we're talking about starvation. It's native people. Verse 17, because this whole chapter is a spliced together conflation of the 70 elders and another thing we'll get back to. All right. 16, Yahweh said to Moses, "Gather for me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people, and officers over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their stand there with you. And I will come down and talk with you there, and I will take some of the Spirit which is upon you, and put it upon them. And they shall bear the burden of the people with you, that you may not bear it yourself alone. And say to the people, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat," and so on. I'll leave that for the other story. And jump down to when they actually do this, 24. "So Moses went out and told the people the words of Yahweh, and he gathered 70 men of the elders of Israel and placed them round about the tent. Then Yahweh came down on the cloud and spoke to him, and took some of the Spirit that was upon him and put it upon the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied, but they did so no more." It was just a one-shot thing, right? 26, "Now 2 men remained in the camp, one named Eldad and the other named Medad, and the Spirit rested upon them. They were among those registered, but they had not gone out to the tent, and so they prophesied in the camp." What? Well, no big deal. I mean, they were stuck in the bathroom, or who knows what. I don't mean to be facetious, obviously, sometimes you can't make it. But it doesn't matter. They're trying to say, see, it wasn't some hysteria, some mob frenzy. These guys weren't even with the others, but they got the share of the Spirit anyhow. 27, "And a young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the minister of Moses, one of his chosen men, said, My lord Moses, forbid them. But Moses said to him, Are you jealous for my sake? Would that all Yahweh's people were prophets, and that Yahweh would put his Spirit upon them. And Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the camp. Well, you see what's happened there. We got an alternate version, the 70 men, choose 70 worthy ones, and we got the succession thing. Though here we've got this charismatic version of it. See, you remember the story where Elijah is about to go to heaven, and Elisha, his disciple, says, look, we can't be without your miracle-working power. Why don't you pass it on to me? Give me twice as much, in fact. Boy, that's a toughie, but all right. If you see me going up, it'll be yours, and it is. He does twice as many miracles. Well, the same idea. He takes the Spirit that was on Moses, some of it, because it's clear the author wants Moses still to be the great charismatic, so he can't just transfer it to these 70 guys. But a little touch of it is enough for them to prophesy right off the bat, though they don't keep doing it. They don't remain prophets. But they do have the ordination. And so this is somebody else's version of the origin of the men of the great assembly. And this we also find in the New Testament. Somebody has borrowed this. In fact, you already know what I'm going to say. There is a section of Mark 9, 38 through 39. In fact, I've mentioned this already today as an important Markan story. It shows where he was at, where his loyalties lay in the factional disputes of the day. I placed Mark around 100 CE or AD, and so here we go with Mark 9, 38 through 39. I paraphrased it a moment ago. Here's the real thing. John said to him, Teacher, we saw a man casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he was not following us. But Jesus said, Do not forbid him, for no one who does a mighty work in my name will be able soon after to speak evil of me. For he that is not against us is for us, etc. That's got to be Paul. Right? The 12 told him not to, but Jesus says, hey, you're okay with me. Well, where did this come from? You got to be blind not to see it, right? This is just what happens when these guys say to Moses, hey, they're these guys not with the group back in the compound, but they're prophesying too. You want me to tell them to stop? No, of course not. Why would I? I wish everybody had this prophetic anointing. And so, same sort of thing. Somebody with a sharp eye says that poor Paul is saying he's no good because he wasn't one of the original 12. Look, what is he doing? Isn't he preaching the gospel? Then what's the problem? What, are we got a copyright on this? So you can see the use of an Old Testament story just rewritten with some Christian names. But that's not all. The famous Pentecost story is based on this. Need I add, I mean, really, again, you gotta be visually challenged not to see this one. Right, what are they doing in Acts 2:1? When the day of Pentecost had come, and they were all together in one place, suddenly a sound came from heaven like the rush of a mighty wind, and it filled the house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them tongues as of fire distributed and resting on each one of them. Well, actually, that part of it is from Euripides, the Bacchae. The Maenads of Dionysus have the flames in their curls and all that. Okay, and they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. Well, of course, you know, that's the same as prophesying. It's the interpretation that alerts the crowd who are envisioned here, listening to this, that they are speaking sensible stuff of preaching the gospel, but they don't know that. They're just speaking in tongues. Just as in the Numbers story when it says they're prophesying. You ever picture the scene? Is it like did he think you had like Jeremiah, Isaiah, Habakkuk, Nahum, Amos, and a whole bunch of them together, all simultaneously saying, "Thus saith the Lord, here's the burden of Assyria for this many outrages," and then Isaiah's right next to him saying, "In that day the nations will go to the mountain of Yahweh," and there's old Jeremiah saying, "Don't resist the Babylonians," all in one huge din, so you can't make anything out? Obviously not. What they mean is they mean later on when Saul is overcome with the Spirit, falls down and starts, quote, prophesying. He's speaking in tongues. They're just taking a Hellenistic term for it later on. But that's what they mean, just inspired gibberish like the Oracle of Delphi. And again, I do not mean to ridicule this. No. You gotta have the detachment, the objectivity, the sensitivity for all things human to realize that no matter how strange such things may be to you, they have their own rationale. Prophetic gibberish, so-called. It just isn't intelligible speech, but it doesn't need to be. It's not supposed to be. It's a different sort of an articulation of something else. It's symbolic behavior saying that the Word of God cannot be rendered in any human equivalent. Which in turn shows you that any claim for an intelligible text to be divinely inspired is already a kind of illegitimate pirating of the original robust notion of inspiration. That's just raw glossolalia, so that people hearing such prophecy will say, "Oh, surely God is in this place," because of the uncanniness that it all represents a rationalization of the raw mysterium tremendum. But that's what they got here. They're not prophesying words and ideas. It's just raw, numinous glossolalia. Just whether you're talking about these guys in the camp with Moses or the early Christians in Jerusalem. So the Pentecost thing is just drawn right from the part of the Numbers story. And as I've said elsewhere, written elsewhere, you look at virtually any gospel story, and it's the same deal. They're virtually all rewrites of the Old Testament or some other classical sources. But again, apostolic succession for the later judges. All right, here is, oh boy, this is a little more complicated even. I know I'm leading you down the garden path to make what once seemed simple to be quite complex, but I'm afraid it is complex. I'm just trying to be your guide, and this one is certainly complex. Here we have what was a ceremonial etiology, that is, fictive origin story for a relic. The golden calf. Now, you already know what the problem is with this. The golden calf is thought to be a blasphemous idol. It's destroyed, etc., etc. It was an act of cowardly and apostasy for Aaron to have yielded to the fickle crowd and made the calf to begin with and all of that. But it wasn't that way in the beginning. That wasn't originally the point of it at all. And let's take a look at a relevant parallel text. First, well, I'll just tell you in case you want to put your bookmark, we're going to be looking at Exodus 13, selected verses in a moment. But let's take a look at 1 Kings 12. And I think you'll see the real historical basis for this. 1 Kings, one of those books you may not visit very often, possibly. You know what I kind of like, what I think would be a great idea for a TV show? You ever watch the Food Channel, or as I like to call it, the Food Porn Channel? Alton Brown's Good Eats. This guy has a sense for the theatrical and the comical. In fact, I'm pretty sure he based the whole premise of the show on Mystery Science Theater 3000. Think about it, you'll see him right. And he does recipes and the history of food and cooking, and all with in sort of an entertaining kind of way. I think it'd be good to have a Bible instruction TV show the same way, where you sort of make the medicine go down a little easier with some jokes and cartoons and skits, and this might be a good choice for one. I can think of a lot of good potential here. But at any rate, 1 Kings, where you're a stranger probably, 1 Kings 12, 28 through 29. This is right after the split between Israel and Judah. That Solomon was an oppressor. The northern tribes said, we're sick of this kind of treatment. And they go to Rehoboam, Solomon's son and heir, and they say, well, what's it going to be? Are you going to ease up on us? If so, we'll be loyal, but if you're the same sort of slave driver your father was, forget it, we're out of here. And so they decide, the king decides, if I give in to them, I'll just feel like John Lindsay handing the city of New York over to the labor unions. I'm going to have to be a tough guy. And so he says, I'm going to be worse than my dad. You lazy bums, get back to work. And I say, okay, that's what I thought. And so the northern tribes leave under the leadership of Jeroboam, who was a rebel against Solomon, who had taken it on the lam, gone to Egypt, and now here he was back. And so they leave, and you got 2/3 of the country up there, Israel with their own separate king now. So here's a great confusion. You got Rehoboam in the south, Jeroboam in the north, and this is also right after Solomon's temple had been built in Jerusalem. One of the wonders of the world. People had to go there to sacrifice, and Jeroboam, the new king of the north, starts thinking, uh-oh, this is quite the attraction. If my people still feel they've got a religious obligation to go down to that damn temple, it's not going to be long before they say, well, a guy that could build a temple like this, maybe he isn't too bad. Maybe we should go back to the house of David, the dynasty of David and Solomon. Gee, I don't want that thought entering their minds. Maybe I'll distract them. I'll give them someplace else to go on religious vacation instead. Tell you what, I got a bigger country to rule here. I could use a couple of temples. So I'll take a couple of holy places, holy already, and build temples on them. And I'll just tell everybody to go there. And then just forget about Jerusalem. which seemed to have worked pretty much. And here's what he did. In 1 Kings 12:28, so let me just go back up to 26. Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David if this people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem. Then the heart of his people will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, young bulls, symbols of virility. And he said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your Elohim, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. And the thing became a sin, for the people went to the one at Bethel, and to the other as far as Dan. Why was it a sin? Well, because the Jewish, that is the Judean writer of 1 Kings, believes in the Deuteronomic centralization of worship, that you had to go worship in Jerusalem at Solomon's temple and no place else. So that's strike number one. You don't have any business building these other competing temples. Well, of course they did. I mean, this wasn't in effect in that day. This is written hundreds of years later. But also, what's that? You've got images, the young bulls that symbolize Yahweh. Ooh, no. Well, of course, that's a later judgment, too. This has to be a mistake according to the later theology, what's called the aniconic, the anti or the no image theology of God. So what do you got here? You have a story that originally tells how that tells of the king building the temples with the great young bull images of Yahweh. They're not supposed to be some other gods now. That's very important to understand. They represent Elohim, gods or God, take your pick, plural ending either way, who brought the Israelites out of Egypt. They knew which God that was. There's no doubt about that. But these are the images under which he's worshipped. Now, let's go back to the story that would have been told at the temples of Dan and Bethel when the pilgrims, the tourists, whatever you want to call them, would go there and say, wow, look at this statue. Father, they'd ask the tour guide, the priest, pardon me for asking, but how do we know God wants to be represented this way? I mean, who sees him after all? Is that really the way he looks? They'd probably say, well, he doesn't really look like this or like anything, but he did tell Aaron how to represent him. I mean, just like you, nobody knew. So they left it up to God's choice. So here's the story they would tell. You find it now in Exodus 32, just parts of it, but enough. I think the whole thing in outline is there. It's just been kind of sprinkled through alien material that seeks to reverse the sense of the story and even make it into a satire of itself. In Exodus 32, verses 2 through 4 to begin with. Okay. Aaron said to them, take off the rings of gold which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people took off the rings of gold which were in their ears, and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold at their hand, and fashioned it with the graving tool. Here, I want to get into that. Let's stop at 4a, because I want to first distill the original thing. And he received the gold at their hand. Let's leave it at that for the moment, and skip way over to 24. And this is Aaron, and I said to them, let any who have gold take it off. So they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and there came out this calf. And then you go back. I'm suggesting that's what originally happened in the story, right? You go back to the end of verse 4. They said, "These are your Elohim, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." And then, verse 5, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to Yahweh." Now that's the original story, right? They said, make an image of Yahweh. Well, how do we know what he looks like? We don't. Let's let him decide. You give me your gold, we'll put it in this melting furnace, and God will, by a miracle, cause it to assume whichever form he wishes. And we'll see what comes out, and then we'll know what God wants us to use as a symbol for him. And that's what the priests would tell you at Dan and Bethel. Oh, it wasn't our decision. It was God who done it. Now, this is not gonna fly in Judea. The redactor knows this story, and he's even gonna use the story, but he can't buy it the way it originally reads here. God is not gonna lead people into idolatry, as the later standpoint viewed it. This writer is operating with the idea, again, that God does not have any form and has commanded us not to set up any graven or molten idols, even of him. So we don't forget about other gods. No idols, no images of the one God. No, that's out. So what's he going to do with this? Well, you know what he does with it. Let's go back and look at it in the context with the other stuff added to it. Okay, 32. Moses is up on the mountain getting the Torah, and people are getting a little tired of waiting. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us Elohim who shall go before us." That's what it is. Moses, was that his name? The man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt. We do not know what has become of him. And Aaron said to them, let's see if I can do John Carradine. "Take off the rings of gold which are in the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron, and he received the gold at their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool. Right, they changed it, right? It doesn't come out miraculously. He makes it. And made a molten calf, and they said, "These are your Elohim, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." I hope you notice, right, that's exactly what Jeroboam says, right? So you can see what's happened here. The one is modeled on the other. And that's what tells us that, yeah, this is what it's really about, the Dan and Bethel calves. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation, said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to Yahweh." And they rose up early on the morning and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. I don't think it was softball, right? They're talking about Playboy after dark here, religious orgies and the like, which were pretty darn common at the time. And Yahweh said to Moses, way up on the mountain, "Go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They've turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They've made to themselves a molten calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'These are your Elohim, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.' And Yahweh said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. But of you I will make a great nation.'" Geez, deja vu, isn't that what he once said to Abraham? Well, let's go back a few centuries and start over. Now I love this. Just like Abraham outwitting God, so he thinks at the beginning of the Sodom story, 32:11. "But Moses besought Yahweh his God and said, O Lord, O Yahweh, why does thy wrath burn hot against thy people, whom thou hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand, in technicolor no less. Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them forth, to slay them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from thy fierce wrath, and repent of this evil against thy people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, thy servants, to whom thou didst swear by thine own self, and didst say to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. And Yahweh repented of the evil which he thought to do to his people. I love that, right? Right, I guess you're right. He gets to God. He says, think of your reputation, big guy. Don't you think if you destroy these people, it's going to kind of get around, and people are going to say, hey, get a load of this. Jehovah brought his people out of Egypt with all kinds of fanfare just so he could squash them in the wilderness. What a God! You don't want him saying that. Well, yeah, all right. You convinced me. 15, and Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tables of the testimony, of the commandments, in his hand. Tables were on both sides. On the one side and the other were they written. And so forth. It happens. He sees all the dancing to rock music and all this awful stuff. He destroys the tables of the law. In 21, Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do that you have brought? What did they do to you that you've brought a great sin upon them? And Aaron said, let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people that they're set on evil. For they said to me, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And I said to them, let any who have gold take it off. So they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and there came out this calf. Then we'll get back to the rest of it. You see what's been brilliantly done here? He just lampoons the original idea in a kind of selective rationalism. Right? If the author, if the redactor, had liked the idea of representing God as a virile young bull, well, there'd have been no problem. But it just spontaneously took form from the molten metal and popped out whole like popping fresh the doughboy, right? That'd have been all right. But since it's not kosher, it's ridiculous. They just threw in the gold and it came out this way. Yeah, right. I find that fascinating. You got the same sort of thing with the prophets later as they ridicule the ignorance of idolaters, but they're not that far from it themselves. But it's great stuff. Now, how can you say you don't like the Bible? How can you say it's not fascinating? How can you say you have to protect it from this kind of treatment by putting it on a pedestal, making it into a golden calf? Now, it's only once you're free to see the shenanigans going on. Call it mischief, call it whatever you want. When you see the ingenuity of the writers and think their thoughts after them, that you can really plumb the depths of the darn thing. I love this book. How can you not? But it sure is more interesting when you don't make it a golden calf. Okay, so there is, surviving below the satirical rewrite, the ceremonial story of how we know God wanted to be represented as a golden calf. It's not that tough to see how come all over ancient Palestine you have a golden calf, little idols representing Yahweh. Ever actually seen a bull? All of them are very mighty, but there's certain bulls that are, I remember seeing one on David Letterman, a bull that was on exhibition in Manhattan, brought over from Italy. I could not believe what I was seeing. I mean, come on, I've seen bulls before. I grew up in Mississippi and Louisiana, and once we were driving from one state to the other, and there were a lot of cattle grazing alongside the old country road we were on. A bunch of black Angus cows, and suddenly, boom, right in the back door, which I was sitting by on the driver's side, a bull, kicked in the side of the car. I mean, yeah, all right, they're strong, but I'd never seen a thing like this that was like a solid wall of muscle. Down where I live now in North Carolina, drive by this one little farm. They've got these things with these gigantic horns. I've never seen the like. You can easily imagine these things are great symbols of power. They naturally suggest themselves as symbols of the divine, whether you're talking about Mohenjo-Daro way over in prehistoric India, or here, or ancient Palestine, whatever. It's not too tough to figure out, but they had to make some excuses because, of course, God, by the time the story was being rewritten, had no form. All right, so great stuff. You got to dig for that one, but there it is. Let's pick up where we left off, though, in Exodus 32, with what happens, the cleanup operation, the mopping up operation Moses commands when he gets down there and hears this excuse from Aaron, or as in Hebrew, boy, I love this, Aharon. Kind of lets the air out of the tire a bit when it just becomes Aaron, though that's a nice name too, but I love that Hebrew, Aharon. But I don't want to confuse you more than I already have, so I'll stick with Aaron. 32:25, and when Moses saw that the people had broken loose, for Aaron had let them break loose to their shame among their enemies. That's the gossip got around. Then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, "Who is on Yahweh's side? Come to me." And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him. And he said to them, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel," or literally, "Thus says Yahweh Elohim of Israel, put every man his sword on his side, and go to and fro from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, and every man his neighbor." And the sons of Levi did according to the word of the command of Moses, and there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men. And Moses said, "Today you have ordained yourselves for the service of Yahweh, each one at the cost of his son and of his brother, that he may bestow a blessing upon you this day." Yikes! What is this? Well, we must assume that it wasn't absolutely everybody that got involved in this idolatrous orgy, this huge office party, because apparently they're killing everybody they saw involved, and that's only 3,000 compared to the many, many thousands that we've been told they had. Of course, the numbers are impossibly huge and so forth, but nonetheless, they really decimated them here, but there must have been plenty of people that weren't involved, right? Because they do go on with the whole thing, the whole story. But 3,000 of them bite the dust, and who is it that kills them? Well, apparently an especially pious group of Hasidim who have the zeal. It reminds me very much of Jehu and the head of the Rechabite order of desert ascetics. He stops by and says, "Is your heart right with Yahweh as mine is?" And he says, "It is." And he says, "Then come up with me on my chariot." And Jehu goes and locks in a bunch of Baal priests and slaughters them all. Very similar. And you wonder where religious violence comes from. You know, I don't know about you, but I don't much care what kind of a god somebody's worshiping as long as there's no bloodshed. I'm not going to start shedding it to get them to convert. But that's what they did, right? You got to eradicate that stain. And so the Levites killed even their own family members who had gone to this awful sock hop of the gods. Were they already denominated the sons of Levi? I don't think so. It seems like it's saying, this is how we got the Levites as priests. You've ordained yourselves this day by turning people into silent. Anyway, you have ordained yourselves by your zeal. And that's the origin of the Levites, according to this. That, however, is not the only origin of the Levites. Over in the book of Judges, we have a story that says, well, a Levite was anybody from any tribe who happened to be able to work the oracular device of the ephod. So if you knew how to be a priest or a prophet, the word kahin or kohen meant the same thing either way, then you're a Levite. But this says, no, they were a separate order that goes back to this house cleaning. And then, of course, there's yet another one that says, no, they simply were one of the 12 tribes. There was a Levi among the sons of Jacob. These origin stories don't quite fit. It kind of implies they're all attempts to replace some earlier suppressed origin myth of the Levites, or forget about the myth, an actual origin of the Levites. Now, what was that? What would that be? Oh, here's another one of these great secrets of the Bible. If you thought you'd have to wait till you got to heaven to find out. I just love that modern fundamentalist myth, with which I can sympathize. I'd love to go to heaven one day and have this big seminar. I mean, I'm going to the Jesus seminar now, right? That's the big elite thing down here. But can you imagine the Bible seminar in the sky, where we got Isaiah and Jeremiah and Moses and Jesus and Paul saying, yeah, I'm kind of sorry I put this that way. I know you've all been confused for a couple of thousand years. Here's what I really meant to say. And you're probably wondering what a parbar is over there in 2 Chronicles. Well, here it is. Oh, yeah, right. Why didn't I think of it? You know, I just love to be there. But that's a wonderful myth. It's really a great one. I love that. But can you imagine you wind up finding out stuff you wouldn't want to know? And this might be one of them. Because what were the Levites originally? Well, Goldseer got this right. The great Ignaz Goldseer, Hungarian scholar of the Bible and Islam. In his just great book, which you want to have, Mythology Among the Hebrews, he says that the Levites were the priesthood of, let's have the drum roll, you guessed it, Leviathan, the great seven-headed dragon, whom Yahweh kills in battle, or tames, depending on which book of the Bible you read. Psalm 74, he crushes the heads of Leviathan, but in Job 41, he merely fishes him out of the sea and tames him as a pet for his children. Nonetheless, Leviathan was, though a monster, a god. He was, in fact, he was specifically the Litani River in Syria personified. You may remember a couple of years ago during that Israeli-Lebanese war, they had a battlefront near the Litani River. That became Lotan, the Canaanite seven-headed dragon, or Leviathan in Hebrew. He appears in the book of Revelation as the dragon from the sea, and so on. This is the first beast that the emissary of Satan, and then the second beast comes up from the land. That's Behemoth, who appears in Job 40. Anyhow, sorry, to go far afield like this, but Leviathan would have been an older, archaic deity like Typhon in Greek mythology. And in fact, in several of these myths where a young god kills a dragon and becomes the new king of the gods because the elder deities didn't have what it took to face the dragon. sometimes they make it explicit that the monster or the dragon or the titan who had to be killed was the grandfather of the hero god who killed them. So you had the grandfather, who was a monstrous being. You had his children, who were the currently reigning gods, but were superannuated. They were old and tired. And then the third generation, the young virile warrior god, Marduk, Zeus, Yahweh, Indra, etc., Baal. And he turns on the eldest god, a monster, and defeats him, and takes over from his own parents' generation. So in the Babylonian story, you have I think Kingu and Apsu and Tiamat, who are the eldest gods, who are frightening the elder gods, the next generation, their own children, Ea and Enlil and the others. And then Marduk in the third generation, who then goes back and destroys the progenitor gods, who are monsters. I think you have enough of that. And the same thing with Zeus, right? Zeus overthrows, it's a little bit different. Again, the shells are manipulated differently in the game, but Zeus overthrows his father Kronos, the Titan, who had sought to avert the overthrow by devouring all his sons. And Kronos had overthrown Uranus. So it's this intergenerational struggle. And so my guess is originally the biblical myth depicted Leviathan as the original god, also called Nehushtan. Both Levi and Naas in Hebrew mean serpent, snake. So he's the serpent god, the river personified, just like the Nile was a god in Egypt, because it brought all the blessings, but it could flood too, and so you needed to be afraid of it and appease it with sacrifice. So the oldest god was Leviathan. His son would have been El Elyon, God Most High. And all these monsters and dragons, led by Leviathan, Rahab, etc., are defeated by El Elyon's son. He's got many of them, but one of them comes to the fore and says, I can do the job, and that is Yahweh. And what does Exodus say about him? Yahweh, Yahweh, a mighty man of war. Well, yeah, he defeated him, and then he takes over for El Elyon, a scene we find in Daniel chapter 7. The monsters arise from the abyss one by one, and then the young warrior, one like a son of man, comes, and then he defeats them, and they acclaim him as having dominion over all peoples, nations, tongues, and kindreds. And the elder god, El Elyon, the one who has the white hair and beard, the one who is ancient in days, makes room for the young one like a man, Jehovah, Yahweh, to take the throne. Job mentions the priests of Leviathan as those who are skilled to rouse up Leviathan. They invoke him as priests. Think of Clash of the Titans, where Poseidon goes down and it causes the Kraken to rise up. That's a kind of a syncretistic piece of mythology, though a good one. Poseidon, obviously, is the Greek sea god, the earth shaker. But the Kraken is not part of Greek mythology. That comes from Scandinavia. But what the heck, who's counting? It's the same sort of idea. These guys could rouse up Leviathan. They must have been his priests. So that sounds more like sorcery to me. What's the difference in those days? Really, there is none. And, you know how that goes, right? Magic equals heresy. Magic is your supernatural. Miracle is mine. It's just like orthodoxy is always in the eye of the beholder. It's always first person, whereas heresy is second or third person. My views are orthodox. Your views are heresy. His views, her views are heretical. That's just the grammar of it, right? Okay? So, we hear how by the way, Nehushtan, where do we hear of him as a god? Well, in 2 Kings. You didn't think we'd get back into the book of Kings again so soon, but indeed we are. This is going to come in doubly handy in just a second. So, 2 Kings 8. Oh, I think I mean 1 Kings again. No, wait a minute. That can't be right. I want Nehushtan. That must... Why do I think that is? What did I say it was? Yeah, 8:4. I think it is 2 Kings 18:4. That's right. Yes, sorry about that, folks. So much for belief in inerrancy, huh? Okay, this is the reform of Hezekiah here. What did he do when he took the throne? He removed the high places, that is the hilltop shrines, and broke the pillars, the matzeba, the sun pillars, and cut down the Asherah, that is little painted sticks stuck into the ground representing Asherah, the goddess. And he broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the people of Israel had burned incense to it. It was called Nehushtan. What? Yeah, of course, there were several gods. These people were not monotheists yet. This is an attempt in that direction. They're trying to wipe out the worship of these other gods, number one, anywhere else but the temple. That's why they go to the high places. You couldn't worship Yahweh or Santa Claus, doesn't matter, away from the temple. But within the temple, they got rid of some gods too. Asherah was Mrs. Yahweh, but they got rid of her. She had her own shrine in there 2/3 of the time the temple stood, but here they're getting rid of her. And Nehushtan, the serpent god, had a chapel in the temple, but they got rid of it. It had been worshipped. You know what it means in Revelation when they offer incense? It's prayer. That's the whole idea of it. People offered incense offerings to Yahweh and to Nehushtan, and Moses had, they said, built this image of Nehushtan. Why do you do that? Well, that's yet another etiology that we don't happen to hear. We don't have to have a story for obvious reasons. It depicted Moses, just as this thing a moment ago, the golden calf, had depicted Aaron as responsible for the statue of Yahweh as a bull. There must have been one where Moses said, look, here's this bronze serpent we're going to worship as the effigy of Nehushtan. Oh, no, we can't do that. We can't have that. That one's not even going to make it in, and not even going to stay in as a satire. What do you got? Well, you have a different story where Moses fashions this serpent for a different reason. I'll get to that in a second. It is to replace the one where he provided the image of this god, which was originally the one that the Levites served, the Nehushtan or Leviathan priests. We read in Ezekiel and elsewhere that somehow the Levites had done something wrong and were demoted. They couldn't be formal priests or offer sacrifice anymore. They weren't just booted out onto the streets, but they were given a demoted, lower set of jobs. Why? Well, because Nehushtan or Leviathan fell out of favor. They had to renounce their loyalty to him, and they could stay in the Jerusalem temple cultus, the service, but at a lower pay rate. What? Well, in other words, they weren't allowed to sacrifice animals. They were singers and musicians and gatekeepers and stuff. It was only the sacrificing priests who got a share of the meat. And so they were demoted. and as Levites. That's what John the Baptist's dad is, Zechariah. He's a local village priest who comes to the temple once or twice a year to have one turn at the incense offering, interestingly. That's what all the Levite priests used to do. But once they cast Nehushtan / Leviathan out of the temple, these guys were, they had to be grateful for what they could get. And, I guess that's good enough for the origin of the Levites. And this is what they sought to cover up. They didn't want to admit that they were the order of priests for a rival god who was eventually kicked out. Let us then take a look at the substitute story of Nehushtan over in Numbers 21, verses 4 through 9. From Mount Hor, H-O-R, they set out by the way to the Sea of Reeds, to go around the land of Edom. And the people became impatient on the way, and the people spoke against Elohim and against Moses. Why have brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness, for there's no food and no water, and we loathe this worthless food. Bah! I'm assuming that was Dothan, played by Edward G. Robinson, in the definitive version of the Moses story. Verse 6, Then Yahweh sent fiery serpents among the people, that is, seraphim, and they bit the people so that many people of Israel died. And the people came to Moses and said, We have sinned, for we've spoken against Yahweh and against you. Pray to Yahweh that he may take away the serpents from us. See? So Moses prayed to the people, and Yahweh said to Moses, Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten when he sees it shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a pole. And if a serpent bit any man, he would look at the bronze serpent and live. That is an apotropaic device. You make a replica, kind of a voodoo doll type thing, of the critter that's given you the sickness, a snake, and you look at the sacred effigy of the snake, and the snake bite poison subsides. Presumably, they kept it in the temple for the same reason. People were told, if you've been bitten by a snake, come on over to the Nehushtan temple. He's the god of serpents, after all, so he's the one whose aid you want. It's like casting out demons by the prince of the demons, which makes a lot of sense, actually. Right? You go to their boss and appeal to them. That's what people used to do. But here, things are sort of out of whack, right? They've been reversed. God, Jehovah, sent these poisonous or fiery serpents. But in Isaiah, the seraphim are arrayed around him in the vision in which Isaiah sees him sitting on the throne in the temple. The seraphs have wings, and they have feet and hands, just as in ancient Egypt when they're depicted. Depending on what the gods want them to do, they sprout, almost like pseudopods, human limbs, but essentially they are winged serpents. And they would have been the servitors of their prototype, Nehushtan. Ever wonder how the serpent in Eden, who is never said to be Satan, by the way, but he is Nehushtan, ever wondered how he used to locomote before he was reduced to abject ground crawling at the end of that story? What did he do before that? Well, he probably had wings. But now he's crawling on the ground. Or he may have had arms and legs. But now he's crawling on the ground, eating the dirt. And so the original serpent would have been Nehushtan, who tried to enlighten the human race. And he is banished by Yahweh, who went out. And the Levite priests were relegated to the lower rung of the ladder for the same reason. And Moses is given a different reason for setting up the serpent on the pole. Does that ring a familiar note with anybody? Well, it should, because that's the caduceus. That is the symbol of medicine. And this was given, originally the healing god Apollo had this, but he traded it to Hermes for the lyre that Hermes had invented. So we see, as in the FTD florist ads, Hermes with a winged helmet running, holding the caduceus, but originally that was Apollo's. The sun god is a healing god when he wants to be, and so it's no surprise that Moses too produces the caduceus, the same medical symbol. And so this story was retold at some point to explain why there ever could have been a bronze serpent in the temple with a Mosaic pedigree. The part they left out was that this was a symbol of Nehushtan, no doubt whose neglect by the worshippers had caused him to send these poisonous servitors after the hapless people. So there was, though a bit garbled, is what remains of another etiology, a heavenly religious relic etiology. Here's a couple more. Maybe we'll finish off with these two and round it off neatly. Nothing much to this. Let's take a look first, though, at Psalm 68, which gives us the cultic Sitzim Leben, or life context, for the snippet we're going to take a look at in Numbers 10 in a moment. But Psalm 68 is certainly a goodie. I recommend a devotional exercise I did back in, about 20 years ago now. I decided that I needed to read the Rig Veda, and I needed to go through the Quran again, and I needed to go through the Psalms again and familiarize myself. So I decided in that year I would every day read one psalm, one surah from the Quran, no matter how long, and 3 Vedic hymns. And I did get through it, and it was mighty interesting. And you start asking yourself, what actually led to people saying this? When would they chant these things and so on? Oh, here's Psalm 68. Gives us an idea. Let Elohim arise, let his enemies be scattered. Let those who hate him flee before him. As smoke is driven away, so drive them away. As wax melts before fire, let the wicked perish before Elohim. But let the righteous be joyful. Let them exult before God, before Elohim. Let them be jubilant with joy. Sing to Elohim, sing praises to his name. Lift up a song to him who rides upon the clouds. Eh? Well, that's the storm god. He rides on the clouds as his chariot. Sorry, he used to say that about Ben-Hadad, the Syrian storm god. His name is Yahweh. Exult before him. Father of the fatherless and protector of widows is Elohim in his holy habitation. Elohim gives the desolate a home to dwell in. He leads out the prisoners to prosperity, but the rebellious dwell in a parched land. In other words, the Israelite prisoners of war, he rescues them, but rebels, criminals, forget it, he exiles them. Verse 7, O Elohim, when thou didst go forth before thy people, when thou didst march through the wilderness, the earth quaked.
The heavens poured down rain at the presence of Elohim. Yon Sinai quaked at the presence of Elohim, Elohim of Israel. Rain in abundance, R-A-I-N. O Elohim, you did shed abroad. You did restore your heritage as it languished. Your flock found a dwelling in it. In your goodness, O Elohim, that you did provide for the needy. Adonai gives the command. Great is the host of those who bore the tidings, namely, the kings of the armies. They flee. In other words, this is good news coming back from the battlefront. The women at home divide the spoil, though they stay among the sheepfolds. The wings of a dove covered with silver, its pinions with green gold. So that's the loot that's being brought back to divide up. When the Almighty, when Shaddai scattered kings there, snow fell on Zalman. O mighty mountain, O mountain of Bashan, O many peaked mountains, mountains of Bashan, why look you with envy, O many peaked mountain, at the mount which Elohim desired for his abode? Yea, where Yahweh will dwell forever, with mighty chariotry, twice 10,000, thousands upon thousands, Adonai came from Sinai into the holy place. You did ascend the high mountain, leading captives in your train, and receiving gifts among men, even among the rebellious, that Yahweh Elohim may dwell there. Blessed be Adonai, who daily bears us up. Elohim is our salvation. Our Elohim is an Elohim of salvation, and to Elohim, Adonai, belongs escape from death. But Elohim will shatter the heads of his enemies, the hairy crown of him who walks in his guilty ways. I have a hunch that's an Edomite in particular, like Esau, his progenitor, wild hair. Adonai said, I will bring them back from Bashan, I will bring them back from the depths of the sea, that you may bathe your feet in blood, that the tongues of your dogs may have their portion from the foe, just as Elijah said that the dogs would lick up the blood of Jezebel when she found that she didn't have enough superdelegates to remain queen. 24, thy solemn processions are seen, O Elohim. Bingo. Here we are. The processions of Eloi, my king, into the sanctuary, the singers in front, the minstrels last, between the maidens playing timbrels. Here's what they're singing. Bless Elohim in the great congregation, Yahweh, O you who are of Israel's fountain. There is Benjamin, the least of them, in the lead, the princes of Judah in their throng, princes of Zebulun, the princes of Naphtali. There's princes, not female, but plural. Summon thy might, O Elohim. Show thy strength, O Elohim, thou who hast wrought for us. Because of thy temple at Jerusalem, kings bear gifts to thee, tribute of conquered kings. Rebuke the beasts that dwell among the reeds, the herd of bulls with the calves of the peoples. Trample underfoot those who lust after tribute. The kings would like to beat us, so we pay them tribute. Scatter the peoples who delight in war. Let bronze be brought from Egypt. Let Ethiopia hasten to stretch out her hands to Elohim. Sing to Elohim, O kingdoms of the earth. Sing praises to Adonai, to him who rides in the heavens, the ancient heavens. Lo, he sends forth his voice, his mighty voice. And he says, ascribe power to Elohim, whose majesty is over Israel, and his power is in the skies. Terrible is Elohim in his sanctuary, the Elohim of Israel. He gives power and strength to his people. Okay, the procession, the victory procession. My guess is that this is, could just as easily be sung by the Levites on the way into the temple after a victory, or out of it anticipating and praying for a victory, and this would be the prayer, viewing it as a fait accompli. It's just as good as happened already. But what does it mean when it says that, when it summons Yahweh to arise and let his enemies be scattered? Well, it's talking about escorting him from the temple onto the battlefield. So where is he? He's in the Ark of the Covenant, and some of the Levites are carrying the Ark with Yahweh invisibly on top of it, enthroned there. So this is mythical. This is at least a matter of faith, not sight. But this is sung by those Levites who carry the Ark of the Covenant with them into battle. You remember the first Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark? They open up what looks like a very old pulpit Bible or family Bible. Boy, I would love to have one of those with the iron hasps and all that stuff. And it shows these great old-looking Bible illustrations. And they got one from the Pentateuch with, and this is great. I'd love a copy of this. If any of you know where I can get one, let me know, and I'll make sure you get better accommodations in purgatory. The Israelites are there in the battlefield, and somehow the Levites are manipulating the ark so that death rays come out of it to zap the Philistines or whoever it is. Boy, that is great. Well, that's not exactly the way it's pictured in the Bible, but pretty much it is. The priests would take the ark of the chest, the box of Yahweh, which was his throne on earth, and carry it and him into battle. So you'd have to win. Of course, usually we have. And they'd say, well, yeah, he is going into battle with us, so, we gotta win. Now, what does this have to do with the Pentateuch? Well, there is a ceremonial guarantee or precedent for this, because they used to do it back then. Numbers 10:35 through 36. Well, let's go back up to 33. So they set out from the mount of Yahweh 3 days' journey, and the ark of the covenant of Yahweh went before them 3 days' journey to seek out a resting place for them. And the cloud of Yahweh was over them by day whenever they set out from the camp. And whenever the ark set out, Moses said, Arise, O Yahweh, and let thy enemies be scattered, and let them that hate thee flee before thee. And when it rested, he said, Return, O Yahweh, to the 10,000 thousands of Israel. You mean they just do it when they would move the ark? They had this idea that they had the ark already in the wilderness. They even had the tabernacle, which was like a breakdown, portable version of Solomon's temple. They kind of reading the temple back into the earlier times. But here they're just moving the ark from one resting place to another. But it's pretty obvious, even from this, that they're abstracting that from these old military scenes where taking the ark into battle, they would sing this as a way of getting their courage up the war cry. And you had to be awfully careful how you prepared yourself to touch the ark. And you know the very famous story where this one guy does not adequately prepare himself. I mean, there's no reason he should have. And he winds up touching it accidentally. And you know the result. In 2 Samuel 6, how about starting with verse 1? David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000, and David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal in Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of Yahweh Sabaoth, who sits enthroned on the cherubim, winged human figures on the lid. And they carried the ark of Elohim upon a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God. And Ahio went before the ark, and David and all the house of Israel were making merry before Yahweh with all their might, with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals and saxophones and oboes and bagpipes and snare drums and synthesizers. Well, I'm kind of going a little far there. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of Elohim and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. You see what he's trying to do, right? The holy ark is about to fall ignominiously into the muddy ditch. This guy can't let that happen. He's a Levite. Oh my gosh, I gotta steady this thing. But he shouldn't have done it. 7. The anger of Yahweh was kindled against Uzzah, and Elohim smote him there because he put forth his hand to the ark, and he died there beside the ark of Elohim. And David was angry because Yahweh had broken forth upon Uzzah, and that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. There's another one of those naming stories, because as my footnote here informs me, the name of the place in English is the breaking forth upon Uzzah. Who knows what that originally meant, but somebody said, well, it must have been God breaking forth and zapping the poor bastard. But they're just taking it along. But of course the original point was they're carried into the battle. Arise, O Yahweh, let your enemies be scattered. That's what underlies the great story in 1 Samuel, the ancient Hebrew version of the Trojan horse story. Let's just take a fast look at that. In 1 Samuel 4, middle of verse 1, now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines. They encamped at Ebenezer. And Mr. Scrooge, that's right, Ebenezer, stone of Acer, stone of help. And the Philistines encamped at Aphek. The Philistines drew up in line against Israel, and when the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who slew about 4,000 men on the field of battle. And when the troops came to the camp, the elders of Israel said, why has Yahweh put us to rout today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of Yahweh here from Shiloh, that is the central shrine of the tribes, that he may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies. So the people sent to Shiloh and brought from there the ark of the covenant of Yahweh Sabaoth, who was enthroned on the cherubim. The 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. When the ark of the covenant of Yahweh came into the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout so that the earth resounded. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, they said, what's this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean? And when they learned that the ark of Yahweh had come to the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, a god has come into the camp. And they said, woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us! Who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who smote the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. Take courage, and acquit yourselves like men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Acquit yourselves like men and fight. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and they fled, every man to his home, and there was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. And the ark of God was captured, and the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were slain. And then you know what happens after this. They capture the thing, but
once it's there, it begins to almost glow with radioactivity, since God is present in it. Now, secretly behind the lines of the enemy, he brings down plagues on the poor, stupid Philistines. They have plagues of hemorrhoids. Yes, that's right. Hemorrhoids and mice infestation. And so eventually they put two and two together and said, you don't suppose this could be because of the ark of the Hebrew God, do you? I'll tell you what, let's find out. Here's a little experiment. Let's get a new ox cart nobody's ever used. Attach some oxen to it that have never been trained before. Let them go where they will, and we will put the ark of Yahweh on the back of it. And if the oxen make their way across the border into Israel, we'll know that that's where God wants it to go, and maybe he will call off the plagues. And that's exactly what happens. So it seemed like, though God was present with them on the battlefield, as this chant would suggest, arise, O Yahweh, let your enemies be scattered, seemed like they lost anyhow. No. Yahweh is doing a little biological warfare behind the lines, a little guerrilla tactic warfare, because he inflicts these plagues on them simply because they have the ark, which he let them have for this purpose. Right? And to see how long it would take them to realize what was going on, they finally said, let's get this thing out of here. And it worked. Whoa, man, what a story. What a story. And then when it comes back in, it goes to this place called Beth Shemesh, the house of the sun, where they worshipped sun god. People start looking inside the ark and dropping like flies because God is in there and you can't look on God's face and live. Oh, man, what a bunch of stories. It's really great. But that's right. Indiana Jones and the gang were right. The ark of Yahweh was the secret weapon on the battlefield. So, just like in the Iliad, right, the gods themselves came down to fight on the plains of Ilium. And so that's where that chant comes from. The war chant of the bearers of the Ark of the Covenant, who were all Levites. They couldn't sacrifice, but they did other stuff. Let me just deal with one more, and that will round it off pretty darn well. And that is kind of anticlimactic after all these war stories and stuff. But it's Numbers 27, 1 through 11, because it is the same kind of story. It's one of these legal precedent things. Numbers 27, I say, 1 through 11. Just to give you some time to page through the Bible. Then drew near the daughters of Zelophehad, oh, don't you love that name, the son of Hefer, well, not spelled the same way, the son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, from the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. The names of the daughters were Mahlah, Noah, interesting, oh, the unfortunately named Hagla. I tell you, can you imagine being a Jewish gal with the name Hagla? Well, anyway, I guess it didn't come across that way in Hebrew. Milcah and Tirzah. And they stood before Moses and before Eleazar the priest and before the leaders and all the congregation at the door of the tent of meeting, saying, Our father died in the wilderness. He was not among the company of those who gathered themselves together against Yahweh in the company of Korah, but died for his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his family because he had no son? Give to us a possession among our father's brethren. Moses brought their case before Yahweh, and Yahweh said to Moses, The daughters of Zelophehad are right. You shall give them possession of an inheritance among their father's brethren, and cause the inheritance of their father to pass to them. And you shall say to the people of Israel, If a man dies and has no son, then you shall cause his inheritance to pass to his daughter. And if he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. And if he has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers.
And if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his kinsman that is next to him of his family, and he shall possess it. And it shall be to the people of Israel a statute and an ordinance, as Yahweh commands Moses.
Well, all right, not that thrilling, I'll grant you that. But it's interesting. This is the kind of thing that led to the Torah to begin with, right? People have a case. They say, "Ooh, man, what are we going to do here? This wasn't anticipated in our customs. We're just going to be out in the cold here, out of luck? Surely, we should have inheritance rights, and there's no guys to inherit it and then take care of us with it." And so they go to Moses and to God, and God says, "Yeah, you got a point, gals." And so here's this precedent. God heard their case and said, whenever this happens again, don't worry, the women will inherit. Strangely, in the Mishnah, there is a statement that Jesus of Nazareth taught that women should inherit equally with men. Strange stuff. In fact, you almost wonder if originally that was not a reference to Joshua amending the Torah, but I don't know. Who knows such things? I guess we're done for this exciting installment of the quest for the dubiously historical Moses, and I shall see you next time.